All right, so our last session, we left off with the commute over Highway 17. The last thing you said was after you'd gotten through, you went to pull over to try and offer some help, but how feasible was that really?
Well, the of course, I wasn't probably the first one that called 911, but I was. We were getting help as quick as we could. And
Well, cell phones really weren't much of a thing.
no,
I mean, that would have been what, the year
that,
before Russell was born? So
no, no, no,
84, 80?
no, no, no. That would have been 80. Yeah, it would have been 84.
84, 85, somewhere in there. So
Yeah.
cell phones really weren't much of a thing. There might have been a few
No.
people with a phone built into their car, but anyway, so this pile of 20 something cars is pushing farther down the road, almost chasing after you pass through, right?
Well, I was out of the way, but I just I went through. That was amazing. I got over or stopped. I went back, and I mean, I will say this that I arrived back at the first cars while there were still more coming. Boom, boom,
Pam,
boom,
boom, boom. Wow.
Because they drove that very quick. I mean, those people that lived over in Silicon Valley, they thought they were Mario Andretti. They put their racing glasses and their gloves on and get behind the wheel of their GTI, and they thought they were at Monte Carlo. Anyway, but I got there, and like I say, when I got there, there was already a panic note to call your mother, and so I did.
When you got back to the dealership finally.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. Commutes were kind of the story of my life when we were in California. When we first went there, my commute was from San Ramon down to Oakland. And then when I went over to...
Is that the highway that had the Mona Lisa in the grass up on the hillside?
One direction, yes. There were two ways to go there, and I would try to check with the traffic and see. One was down Crow Canyon and catch 580 down to Hayward. The other one was down 680, and it would go past Danville, that area, and at Walnut Creek, turn left and go down through the Caldecott Tunnel. Those were the two ways to get to work.
But
And
the Mona Lisa on the side, that was some...
Alamo.
Okay, but that was some projects from botany class of UC Berkeley or someplace that went out and fertilized and planted in such a way to create this picture of the Mona Lisa's face on the side of the hillside.
It was
all in
amazing.
natural grasses and stuff.
Yep.
And it was there for years because it took a few years before it finally got overgrown or everything. But
Well, it got fuzzier each year. The basic would come back, but the first year it was beautiful. It was just so clean and crisp. It was really unique. That was very early.
anyway, but that was one of your commutes is there.
Yeah.
And then, because you and I actually put down all the different houses that we lived in until you and Mom finally divorced. I put it down somewhere. Oh, I know where I put it. Right here in this.
Oh, yeah.
Okay, so you started out married in Bountiful.
Yep.
Then you eventually bought a home in Granger.
Yeah, there was a couple of places in between there, but yeah.
Well,
Yeah.
when you put this list together with me, it was the places that you lived with kids, right? So Bountiful, Granger, San Ramon, San Mateo, Concord, Pleasant Hill, Santa Cruz, Aptos, and then finally Sandy before the two of you
Yep.
divorced. But so you're saying when you first got married,
The first place when we got married, we had a little apartment, a little one-bedroom apartment on Center Street in Bountiful.
okay,
And then we moved into the avenues, Third Avenue. And at that time, Beth was walking from Third Avenue down to North Temple, because that's where LDS Business College was. And she was going to school, and I was working on 4 South. And
Firestone.
And I was originally with Arbeck's Tire, and then Arbeck's Tire, which was owned by a subsidy of Firestone, decided they wanted me to be with Firestone, and they took me over to the store on 3rd South and 3rd East, I think it is. And I worked there until they shipped me off to training in Ohio. And then they put me in this training program, and I traveled a little bit, and I did some store setup work that was really, really a lot of fun, but it was all travel. And then when I came back home and Kristen was born, then we bought the house in Granger, and
But you had moved up to a little place in Bountiful at one point too, hadn't you?
yeah, we did.
There was some place that your mom wanted to rent, and you went out, because we covered that on one of the
Yeah.
last sessions. That
It was a terrible place.
you
but
guys tuned it all up, and then finally moved out, and they wanted some to keep your deposit. And you're like, look, we improved this place. We moved in when it was dirty and cleaned it all up and have done repairs and stuff. And now you want to keep our deposit?
Yeah, and they did. Anyway,
And then you moved to Granger, and that was the
Yep.
first house you bought, right?
Yes.
Granger, before
Yes.
it was incorporated to West Valley City.
Yep.
That was the first house that you bought. And that's my first memory of a home.
Yep.
Because I don't know if I was born there,
Yes,
but
you were.
Well,
Not in the house.
no, but I meant I lived there long enough that I can go from 0 to 4 and remember the basic floor plan of the upstairs and the split entry and a dog or two that lived there, like Herkimer Peabody and a little puppy and that kind of thing. So, but that was the Granger house. Did you start with Firestone at the Granger house and then end with
Yes.
Exterior Builders?
Yes.
And then Exterior Builders folding had you go out to California
Yes.
for employment. So mom lived in Granger while you got established in California, and then you eventually moved the family out to San Ramon.
Yes.
And that was the first house. And as I remember it, that was the one with all the rocks in the front yard.
Yes.
And
Elmira Place.
Yep, and a couple of units up the road was the community pool with the HOA. I assume took care of that. There was a pool, and we had a little patch of grass in the backyard, and that was the house that we were living in at the time that your parents came out to visit, and your
Yes.
dad ultimately passed away at Roy's house.
Yes.
Okay, then from there we moved to San Mateo. San Mateo is the one that I associate with Toby the dog, the black lab, where the garage door had 2 garage doors, one on the front and one missing on the back. Is that the house?
No, that was Concord,
Oh, okay.
Magnolia Way.
So what was San Mateo then?
San Mateo.
Oh no,
was-
I can tell you which that one. Now that I say that, because I associate that with kindergarten. Because I was in kindergarten at San Ramon, and then we moved. You put me in kindergarten again, this time in San Mateo, and that house was 2-story on a cul-de-sac with a big rock.
Yep.
When I say big rock, I mean like boulders in the middle of the cul-de-sac, so you had to drive around it.
Yeah.
We got our bikes there for Christmas, and I remember learning to ride a bike down that little bit of a hill. I remember there being pins at the end of the cul-de-sac that could be pulled out so the fire department across the street could come in without going all the way around the neighborhood.
Yep.
That was San Mateo. Mom ran a little daycare out of the house.
Yep.
There.
1818 Canyon Court, I think it was.
Anyway, that was my second kindergarten class there, and was that during that time of San Ramon and San Mateo. Those were the Canal Oldsmobile, then Saramonte,
Saramonte when we were in San Mateo.
and then back to Canal Oldsmobile,
And
then
we went to Concord,
and then we went to Concord, and
then we went to
Concord again. We're renting all of these places
no.
in California, right?
The first one we bought in California was Concord, Magnolia Way, the one with the garage in the front, and the garage in the back.
And that's where I got,
talking about.
and that's where I got the train set.
Yes.
That you started building it in our front room, and it got to be too big, and you couldn't keep the secret from us. So then you started building it in the garage of the neighbor across the street.
Yep.
Told them it was for their kids. Told us it was for their kids when it was really for us. And it kept getting bigger and bigger until it was this train set on a full sheet of plywood, and with mountains and
Yeah, we
a
had
little car dealership
Yep.
and streets and things like that.
Yeah, that was fun.
And then but that would have been, that was Concord, and that was at that point you're back at Canal Oldsmobile.
Yes.
Okay, and you stay at Canal Oldsmobile, you sell Concord, and you buy
Pleasant Hill.
Pleasant Hill. That's the one that is quite literally, of as I remember it, being up a hill
Yeah.
to drive up there.
Yeah.
And that's where I go to first grade for the second time. Now, when I say that, I mean we started at first grade in uh, San Mateo, but before we finish the school year, we move, and I finish in another class in the first grade in Pleasant Hill. And I remember playing catch in the backyard. I remember us having pine trees in the backyard.
Mm-hmm.
I remember swing set in the backyard. I remember doing Easter egg hunts and things like that because there was no fence around the house. I remember being able to run completely around it. And we had like ice plant
Mm-hmm.
up on the hillside because, again, we weren't at the very top of the hill. It continued to go up until it ended in a cul-de-sac above us. And it wasn't very many, 4 or 5 homes from the end up there. But I remember walking all the way down the hill and then up the other side to go to school and then walking back down. And then we started second grade there at that house for me, but we were only there for 2 weeks before we moved at that point to Santa Cruz and Anchorage Avenue because I went to Live Oak
Yep.
Elementary, and we were 1 year in that house, and that house was a rental.
Yes.
And then you're still working at that point, it's Roy Baldwin Motor Companies that come
Yep.
into existence. That's the reason we rented that place. And then you end up buying Aptos House, and we're in that Aptos house for who knows how many years
10.
before 10 total, but before you go first to Expressway, Jeep Renault,
Right.
and we probably have a few more stories to finish up there. And then from there, you end up going to work for Love Chevrolet in Seaside.
There's one little, very short in between there was Mary Oldsmobile in San Jose.
Okay, I don't even know of that. I didn't even know of that place. That wasn't even on my radar.
It happened kind of quickly because it was a quick fix, and
It wasn't the right fix because you didn't stay there very long.
no, it was the right fix, but they didn't need me anymore. I mean, it was family owned, and the real problem with that store was one thing: nepotism. They had a whole bunch of family drawing big salaries, but didn't do any work.
To pay for it. That sounds like the Butterfields here
Yep.
in Utah. They had all these Butterfields on the gravy train, but not enough people to support them. So anyway, so Expressway Jeep Renault, you run that store for a while. Tell me about how you became the service manager, and then
Oh, well, they finally found a dealer candidate that came in when Norm left. They trooped a couple of different people through there trying to find someone that was willing to take on that responsibility to be the dealer and to invest their money in it. And
so Norm was the general manager, but he never really pulled the trigger to become dealer of record.
Right.
And so when he left, they brought somebody else in.
Yes. They had a couple of them. I don't even remember some of them. They were there so short. But the one that, in the end, was a person. His name was Kay Delary. Delary, he's from Canada, though his family is originally from Pakistan. And he was probably the most dishonest person I've ever met in my entire life. The only time you could believe what he was saying is if he was totally quiet and his mouth was shut. If it was moving, he was lying. Anyway, he was a terrible guy, but I was on a contract with American Motors, so he could not fire me. But he was in charge, and he would tell me what to do, and I would do whatever he told me to do, because he was the boss. And as Robert said, I would come to work thinking I'm the new car manager, and he'd say, no, today I've decided I want you to be the used car manager. And the used car building was another 50 yards to the east of the main building. So I'd go clean up my desk, and I'd move over to the used car deal and set it up and start to work. And the next day I would come in, and he'd say, well, I've thought about it, but I really think where I need your assistance and your help is in service. And so I would go over and I became the service manager and the parts manager and the fleet manager and
So
the
basically,
finance
he had
manager.
instructions that he could fire anybody in the dealership except for you because you were under contract.
Yeah.
That was that original contract with you and Norm, that
Yeah.
Norm Garrett, that you'd
Yeah,
signed. So he was unable to get rid of you. He inherited you, and for some reason, he didn't like that.
he decided he was going to find a way to get me out of there. And he tried all kinds of things. And then he found my Achilles heel. And that Achilles heel was my people. And the last month I was there, he had manipulated Mike Wiseman's situation to where he'd worked for an entire month and was going to receive a zero check. And at that point, I went into Kay's office and closed the door. And I says, the person you want to go away is me, not Mike. And Mike's doing you a heck of a job. And there isn't anybody here that's going to do any better. So let me grant your wish and I'll leave. And you pay Mike. And we put another agreement together. And that was basically the bottom line, is I would walk away. But I also had a place to walk to because I knew he really didn't like me. And I was the enemy as far as he is concerned. But I went over to Mary Oldsmobile, in San Jose. And the rep from General Motors for the area had heard what I had done over at Expressway and also was aware of what I had done with Oldsmobile in Santa Cruz. And so he came to me and he says, I have a deal and we would like to hire you. And they agreed to pay me a lot of money. And I'll introduce you to the dealer. And of course, I already knew the dealer because I'd met him before at Oldsmobile meetings. And I went over and I met with him. And he was told that he was hiring me, whether he liked it or not, and that I had full control of his operation. And he had to turn that over or they were going to pull his franchise. And he was in trouble with his franchise. And so he agreed.
So you became the fix-it man. You went in there.
Yep, that's the only reason I was there. Was I was going to go. Wasn't looking for a long-term relationship. I was just looking for this job, and the job paid a lot of money.
Just righting the ship.
Yep. So I went there, and I spent the first week paying attention and looking at different things and looking in different areas and trying to find the flow. And it was very obvious that what the problem was. He had a pretty large family of grown adult kids that were sharp. In fact, one of them was a absolute scratch golfer. He was a professional golfer as far as I was concerned. But he was drawing a considerable salary, but he was nowhere to be seen at the store. And all of a sudden that led me to his brothers and sisters and somebody's wife and somebody's husband that were on the payroll. And we got together and I met and I said, well, this is going to be the easiest fix in the world. Stop paying these people for doing nothing. And either they get productive or they're gone, period. And so he trooped him in and we met with him individually. And there was one that was willing to come and work and had the talent to do it, and he stayed. But there was at least another 5 that were terminated, and they went someplace else.
And how long were you at that dealership total? Was that a
2 months.
2 months is all it took to set them on the right course, and then
Yep.
they were
They had the right people, but then they had these other people
leeches.
that they had titles, but they didn't do anything. I mean, the one that was a professional golfer, he played golf every day I knew him. He was good.
So how did you find Love Chevrolet then?
I found Love Chevrolet when I was at Mary. I got a call from a previous employee of mine that had followed Don Smith. I mentioned Don Smith earlier. He was a guy that Roy hired. And when he left Roy, he went to Love Chevrolet. And he took Stephen Phillips with him. Stephen Phillips was a salesman, not a bad salesman, pretty good salesman. At one time, he was the drummer for Count Basie's orchestra. And that was his claim to fame, but he was also a pretty good salesman. Anyway, he had followed Don down there, and Don had quit and left Frank in the lurch. And the store was...
Frank is Frank DeAnda,
Frank
the dealer
DeAnda.
of record.
Yep.
Okay.
And he had left Frank DeAnda in the lurch, and the store was in big trouble. So I went down and interviewed with Sharon Van Winkle, who was the business manager, and Frank DeAnda, and they hired me as the general sales manager. And I got in there, and it took a little longer, but we figured out that a couple of the lenders were really putting Frank together, and so was Don Smith when he was there. He was not a good person, but anyway, we righted the ship, got it going, and made some really good money. But some of the people that were there, they were better drinkers than I was. Now, I didn't go to the bars, but Frank did. Frank used to like to hang out at a place called the Rustic Rooster in Monterey. And he was a fun guy. Frank's a fun guy, and he is a good guy. And a lot of the salespeople and others would go over to the Rustic Rooster, and they partied fairly regularly. One of my jobs was on a night when they've been out doing that, is I'd get a call in the morning about 9. It would be from Frank, and Frank would say, I need you to find my car. And we kind of knew his haunts, so we'd go out and find his car. And I always had a set of keys on my ring, actually, for his car. And I'd get one of the lot guys would go find the car, and then would take it to Frank, and then Frank would eventually come to work. But people that wanted to complain, like to go get Frank at the Rustic Rooster and tell him all of the horrible, nasty things that this mean guy Ross is doing to him, and how Ross is throwing work out the door and da-da-da-da. And so I was constantly fighting that, and I'd have to go in and defend myself on why we didn't make this deal, or what I saw. And it was a tough year, but I was there for a year. And when my anniversary came up, he took the management staff to Hawaii, and I stayed and managed the store. And right after they left, I was given the notice that I need to find work when he gets back, because I wouldn't have a job when they got back from Hawaii. And so okay. And I went home and called Roy, and Roy had just sold. No, he didn't. He hadn't sold it yet. He still had Riverton Motors.
Not Riverton, but
No.
Roy Baldwin Motor Company.
No, he didn't. He had sold the store at that point.
As I understand it, he had built his new location out off next to the freeway in Capitola.
Yes.
Okay. And so the old Water Street building was sitting essentially mothballed. You
Yeah.
had the service department was being leased out by Big O Tire.
Well, it is now, but it wasn't then. But yeah.
Even so, the building was somewhat vacant. So here you go down to Love Chevrolet, you help right their ship, and then those in power above you are threatened. This is the way I understand it, are threatened at the job that you're doing. Like you're doing such a good job that it's going to come out that you're the workhorse and they're not. They get a little fearful for their job. They go off to Hawaii. They finally convince Frank to let you go because you're a troublemaker. When in reality, you're the workhorse.
Yep.
And so you lose your job. You get with Roy now, and this is when you start Water Street Auto Brokers, right?
That's correct.
Where does Jim Harrison come in at?
Jim Harrison hired on at Love Chevrolet. I was interviewing for some salesmen, and he came in on his motorcycle, and he came in and he interviewed me, and it went really well. And I said to him, "Well, okay, I'm going to make a decision on these positions, but I'm going to need let me think it over tonight." And he said okay, and he went and jumped on his motorcycle. And the next day he was there, and to follow up on it, and I hired him. And what I didn't know is he was living in Lake Tahoe, and he had driven all the way to Seaside to make that appointment. And when he didn't get the job, or right then, he had to, virtually homeless, sleep out wherever, and came back the next day, and we hired him, and it was probably one of the best people I've ever met as far as ability to run a good operation very profitably, and
But he was your star pupil because you mentored him, right? He hadn't been in the car business before?
no, well, he had been as a mechanic.
Okay.
I mean, he was a journeyman mechanic for Toyota, and at Larry Miller in Salt Lake, and had left there with he and his girlfriend. They went to Lake Tahoe. They were both avid skiers and kind of devil may care. He worked maintenance at Heavenly Valley and skied when he wasn't fixing something. And he decided he needed to get in the car business, and he wanted to get where it was warmer, so he came down. He heard about Seaside, and so he came down and applied. And
The reason I brought him up is because he was one that followed you after whatever short time he had under your tutelage there at Love Chevrolet. You leave Chevrolet, and he followed.
left with me.
He left with you. He was like, "Well, if you're out, I'm out too."
Yeah.
So
Yeah, he was very loyal to me. And he also, again, a mechanical background. When we opened Water Street Auto Brokers, he opened a emission station in the back and would do the recon on our cars, and also do smogs and safety
and some
inspections
detailing.
and detailing. He took care of that part of it, and I was running the front end. Now both of us were selling. He was selling and I was selling, as far as running the front end. But yeah, he was a good guy. And then when I went back to Love 1 year later, that I got a call from Sharon, who was his new business manager, and she said, "You need to come see Frank. He needs your help." And I said, "Hey, if he needs my help, he knows he can call me." So within another 5 minutes, the phone rang again, and this time it was Frank.
So you left Love Chevrolet, started Water Street Auto Brokers. You started started to talk about Roy. Roy was your financial backer there.
Yeah.
You didn't have the resources
No.
to floor a fleet of used cars, but that's
No.
what you were. You were a used car lot, and you played broker. If somebody wanted something new, you could find it for them, that kind of
Sure.
thing.
Yeah.
And so you did that for about a year. Never, I mean, you were able to put some food on the table, but it never was this
Never really
got off the ground for you. It was just
didn't do extremely well. We did make enough to keep eating.
right.
You know, nobody.
You took care of Jim. Jim didn't starve. He had his.
And
He was making his money on several different fronts: mechanicking, detailing,
Yep.
smogging, selling, that kind of thing.
Yep.
And then you closed that down after a year. Did Jim follow you back to Love, or
No.
did he?
No, he went the other way. He went wholesale, and he went to Cardinelli's, who was down in that same auto mall, but he went to Cardinelli Brothers, which was they had Pontiac and GMC and possibly maybe it was Nissan. Oh, another one they had was Mitsubishi. But anyway, it was a different dealership.
But he didn't follow you back to Love.
No, he didn't follow me.
So let's go back to Frank now. So Frank calls you up and says, "I need you to come back. I made a
Right.
mistake.
Yeah,
I took the word of the wrong guy. You were the workhorse."
yeah. And it didn't happen instantly, but we met and we talked, and then he finally called me and came again, and he said, "Look, I learned my lesson. I need you. I got my son Steve up at Cal Berkeley, and he's going to be graduating before long, and I'd really like you to train him to do this right. I want him to eventually
Take
Take
over
it
the
over.
store.
And I said, I'd be happy to do that. And we sat down and we talked about a 5-year program to get Steve up to speed because he was graduating very quickly. And I came back and
This time you come back as what?
general sales manager.
So you left as general sales manager, you came
Yeah.
back as general sales manager?
Yep.
I always thought you came back as general manager when you returned.
Well, I think it was semantics. Frank was the dealer,
right.
and he is the man, and you can't have both. You know, though Frank did very little at that point. His background prior to getting that store, he'd been at most a used car manager, and so I called the shots, but I also kept him in the loop. I did.
So there wasn't a general manager per se. Frank was his own general manager, but since he wasn't doing it, you found yourself filling those roles more
Yeah.
often than not.
I can tell you that if Frank introduced me to you, he would have said, "This is my general manager."
Okay.
But the reality of it was not quite that, because Frank, again, Frank, there was a separation between Frank and I. We to this day, I mean, he's still alive, and I.
Oh, is he? Frank Deanda's still kicking, huh?
Yep, he's the same age as Roy, and Steve too. But anyway, I was calling up, but still, you still had even after there was still that whispering behind here and here, and Baldwin isn't doing. Every once in a while, Frank would come to me and say, "Why it is down the street that dealer selling all these cars and doing all this?" And I said, "Frank," and I said this to him more than once. I said, "Frank, if the only thing that matters to you is to pump cars out of here, I can pump cars out of here in bigger volume than we're doing now. And We could probably do it and even make a bigger profit margin than we're doing now. But I'm telling you, you better put your store up for sale because it isn't sustainable. Now, it'll look good to the buyer and he'll come in here and he'll spend his money to buy it, but you don't want to be here when the roof caves in.
Yeah, when it's time for him to trade that car in, he's going to realize what you did to him.
Well, yeah, we were surrounded by it. The Ford store, which was right across the cul-de-sac from us, 5 of their people went to jail when that finally collapsed. That's the one where the local GMAC manager and a very close friend of ours and mine came in, and I said, "What's going on over at the Ford store?" He says, "Well, they've been making gypsies into generals." When that collapsed, it took those guys, they went to jail. They closed a branch of the Bank of America that was handling the loans. I mean, it was an ugly deal.
Yeah.
And I've seen those over the years. I've seen them. You know, there was another one. His name was Ralph Williams down in Colma Daly City. That he went to jail for a long time because of what he did. But he was on TV and he was the power. Him and Cal Worthington kind of duked it out to see who could scream the loudest on TV. But
So you come back, 5-year plan to bring Steve DeAnda up to speed.
yeah,
And now we're approaching 1990 before that's going to be done, right?
yeah, it's not going to be done by 1990. That's in probably about 1997
1987.
or 87.
I would say that's correct because when I first got my driver's license, you were at Love.
Yes.
By the time I start, because I'm trying to think here. I remember you being at Love and you bring home this little Volkswagen Bug for $500, and I'm like, that's a death trap. I'm not going to drive it. So you take it back. The next day, all of a sudden, the car guy in me suddenly emerges, and I'm like, wait a second. You could buy that for $500. I could sit on it for 6 months and sell it for $1,500. And you're like, you're right, but it's gone. You had your shot. I took it back.
Yep.
Somebody else took it.
Yep.
So I learned my lesson on the car business real quick on that. But then you're up at Water Street Auto Brokers, and so because you're running a used car lot, you have the ability to slap dealer plates on the cars. And now Krista and I are both driving little convertible Cabriolet Rabbits for a season and trading out different cars and whatnot. And then you finally go back to Love, and that's when you buy what I affectionately refer to as the Jolly Bubba Turbo Express. That was the first of the Chevettes, and that was an '84 coupe with no radio, no air conditioning, vinyl seats, 2-door. Well, that's what a coupe is, 2-door, a little hatchback. And so
You had a radio.
No, I paid to put a radio in it.
Oh, okay. Well, I just know that it had a radio.
Yeah, it didn't when I got it. I drove it for a few months before I finally had enough cash to put a cassette player, AM/FM cassette in there. But anyway, that would have been, and so I'm a sophomore by then. So if I'm a sophomore and I graduate in 1990, you're back at Love Chevrolet, 88, 87, somewhere in
87.
that. 87. Okay.
Yeah, the year that we were in the auto broker business, I think was 86.
Okay.
And that was the year we went to Disneyland and our first real family vacation. But
Anyway, so you're down at Love Chevrolet. You're essentially the general manager. And
I didn't like titles. In fact, I used to always say, it's just Ross. Just Ross. In fact, I even had a stamp that said, just Ross.
yeah, I remember you had an awful lot of business cards printed up with no titles on them at all.
Oh, no, I didn't like titles. They
got in the way, huh?
Yeah, they did. Yeah, titles got in the way. I didn't like titles because of that. I mean, if you hand somebody your card and you're the general manager, you don't have a lot of negotiating room.
No, what you say is final, right?
Yep.
So they pin you down. So it was there that is it Clarence I'm thinking of? Is that was there a Clarence there, a black salesman?
Yep.
The story with him getting set in his ways on what he was making, and so you started.
Yeah.
You know.
When I hired Clarence, he just got out of the military,
Okay.
and he came over there, and in the interview, he says to me, he says, "Well," I said, "How much money do you need to make?" And he said, "Well, I'd like to make at least $900." And I said, "What?"
$900 a month.
He says, I'll start for less." I said, "No, you won't start for less. Listen, if that's what your goal is to get to $900 a month, I don't want you working here. I need you to think bigger. I need you to think much, much bigger." And Clarence, he's alive too, and he and I chit chat once in a while. But he came from Mississippi, Mobile, Alabama, it's his hometown, and he dirt poor, and went in the military. He was a nurse in the military, and became some kind of a machine operator in the hospital, and then he decided to get out and get in the car business. And super likable guy, fun guy, joking around, big, tall guy, and wasn't very athletic. I remember him. We had a softball game, and he was telling me about his athletic prowess, and he decided he wanted to be the first baseman, and he couldn't catch a ball, so that didn't work out too well. Well, it was fun. But Clarence, I broke through him. I got rid of his mental lid, and he ended up being a crew chief, and a doggone good one, and made a lot of money.
Wasn't it him though that he kind of got settled in on making a certain amount, and so then you told them do not give him his commission vouchers, so that he doesn't. And every time he'd come up and say, "How do we do on that one?" You'd say, "Oh, not too good. Another mini type thing."
Another mini.
And so here he is thinking, "Oh man, I'm not going to be able to make my paycheck," and so he just buckles down. He sells more cars than he's ever sold before.
Yep.
And then he goes to the pay window at the end of the pay period. I don't know. Did you pay once a month? Did you pay every week?
No, he had a draw on the 15th, and a draw on the end of the month, and then the washout of commissions was on the 5th. And the other thing is we had the computer screens that we worked deals on. Up in the right-hand corner, there was a little place up there where it told us what our gross was. And I caught him
Always checking it out.
always checking it out and doing what you
Doing the
said.
math, figuring out
Yeah.
what his paycheck was.
He'd look at it and say, "No." As soon as he got in the black, he quit. So first thing I did, I went and got a piece of tape and I covered it. Oh, that made him madder than mad. Oh, and that really fired him up. But I told him, "You don't want to know. Leave it up to me. I'll get everything there is, and we'll get you making some money." But you're right. The month that we didn't pass out his, and he was mad because everybody else was getting theirs, and he, no, you haven't got that yet. Just count up how many cars you sold and times it by 50.
Because they're all minis.
But he's a good guy.
And then when he finally got his paycheck, all of a sudden he made so much money he wasn't ready to go back to the old ways.
No.
And so then his performance increased. He became your crew chief, that kind of thing, right?
Yep. He did a good job, and then eventually I guess he left Love and went to Las Vegas, and he went down there with a Ford dealer and did really well. And now he's retired, but he's a priest. He
Oh, yeah?
Yeah, he's got him a little church down there that he.
Well, that's great.
What's happening now? And,
All right, so it was at Love Chevrolet where you had the guy, the detective or something, come in after saying that they found some guy. So tell us that story.
well, okay, yeah.
I guess we should preference that you've always been one for the catchphrases and the one-liners. In fact, you sent me a text the other day that said that's where I got the phrase that I got more ass than he's got teeth, that
Yeah.
kind of thing. So, you know,
Well, we had this young soldier, and he was in there. He was trying really hard to buy a car, and I could, but he didn't have any money down, and he had no credit, and there wasn't a way to go here. And finally, I said to him, I says, "Listen, what you got to do is you got to come up with the money down. Go to the bank, uh, and go rob a savings and loan." I think he said. Take your gun, go rob the savings loan, bring back that down payment, and I can get you financed. Well, the next thing I have is this guy comes in and he says, "I need to talk to you for a minute." I said, "Okay." So I had a little side office there.
because this was a kind of a phrase that you'd use on occasion. Like you'd
Yeah.
say jokingly to somebody, I don't care where you come up with the down payment. You could knock over the local 7-Eleven.
Yeah.
You could knock over the local savings and loan.
Yeah.
But you got to have a down payment. I don't
Yeah.
care where it comes from. So
Yeah.
that was the joke that you would say to him. This
Yeah.
guy obviously didn't pick up the joke or the sarcasm.
No, unfortunately, he didn't. But the officer sat down and he opened up this thing that he had, and it had pictures of 6 people. He said, "Do you recognize any of these people?" And I said, "Yeah, I recognize that one. He's in the store." And it was that guy. He says, "You would not believe what he told us. He says that he was over here trying to buy a car, and that somebody told him to go get a gun, hit the 7-Eleven, and bring back the down payment, and we'll get you into a car." And I'm thinking, and he says, "Can you believe that?" I said, "Boy, that sounds really strange to me."
Can you believe anybody would be stupid enough to say that?
Yep. I don't know whatever happened to that poor guy, but
But you didn't lie to the officer. You just didn't
No.
answer his question.
no, I just didn't answer his question. Yeah. Yeah, I had a few of the different types of things like that. I did. I always liked to stand up for the little guy in many things, and I always have detested bullies, and I've got myself in binds a few times there. I think we went through those, didn't we? With the
A good number of them. Doesn't mean that we've touched on them all. I'm sure
Yeah.
there'll be something else that'll pop up. But at this point in your career, I'm graduating high school and headed to the mission field.
Mhm.
You are, I guess, feeling antsy to get back to Utah.
Well,
or buy a
after
dealership or something. What?
well, what was happening is Steve got graduated from college. We brought him down, and I started training him, and he didn't like to sell, so we put him into finance, and he was working finance, and he and Doug McIsaac. Doug was another real good finance guy. Doug came from GMAC, was his background, and so they were the finance guys, and the thing was we were going to work on it, and we are going to bring him along, but Steve, he wanted it yesterday. He wanted to be the boss. So now all of a sudden Steve becomes the guy that's second guessing me and going to his dad. That's not good. And we had a few talks about that, and finally I made the decision, I'm not going to be able to stay here. Frank told me I could stay there for as long, forever. He says, my contract with Frank says he couldn't fire me for any reason. But
But you're not wanting to come between
No.
Frank and Steve, and
no.
and you can see
I
the
don't
writing.
want-
You can see the writing on the wall, kind of that Steve's going to
and
take over
so-
someday. But
And the process there, in the way it's done in the car business, at least then, was you had to get the permission from your dealer to even look. Because if you contacted the different manufacturers, they would not, unless you had a letter from your dealer that said it was okay, you couldn't. So I got a letter from Frank. And I went and looked at a couple of stores. I looked at one store. It was a Ford store up in Calaveras. And it wasn't something that I really wanted. Then I landed on a real.
Because right now you're partial to General Motors, right?
Oh, yeah.
Chevrolet.
That's where
You've always loved Oldsmobile, but now you're in with Chevrolet. And
Yeah, General Motors. That's there's an old quote from a guy named Sloan that created General Motors, and he always said, "If it's good for America, it's good for General Motors." And I kind of felt that way too. That General Motors was, it was domestic. It was us. So I get a lead on one in Moscow, Idaho. And I take 2 days, I fly up there and go see it, and it's doable. And it's a nice little store in a college town. In fact, actually 2 college towns. There's Pullman, Washington, and Moscow, Idaho. There's a river that runs between them. And in Pullman is Washington State, and in Moscow is Idaho State.
mm-hmm.
So, pretty good town, real solid community, real solid economic base. And so I came home and talked to your mother, and your mother said, absolutely not.
If we're going to go somewhere, let's go back to Utah.
Yeah, well, she wanted to be closer to her parents, and certainly she had strong ties there. And as you know, we used to visit there.
Yeah.
Very frequently, sometimes with and sometimes without me.
Right.
But anyway, she wanted to go back to Utah. So then I contacted the Denver zone, and I had an angel. His name was Don something. He was the vice president of Chevrolet, right underneath Jim Perkins at the time. Jim was the president. He was a friend too. I met both of those while I was working at Love. And Don Campbell was his name. And Don Campbell's very best friend in the entire world was a doctor back in Michigan who had a daughter that was going to school out in California. And she was having some car problems, and they sent her in to Love Chevrolet and to see me, and I helped her. I mean, it was easy to help her. She had a blank checkbook, she just didn't know it. And anyway, in me doing that, and now when she did her deal, her finance person was Steve DeAnda. And so she bought her car, she was happy. Right after that, we had a golf tournament out at Pebble Beach, and Perkins came out, and Don came out, and I got to meet them again. And so I put in a call to Don and said, my wife would really like me to come back to Utah. And he said, well, let me see what I can do. So he calls the Denver zone, talks to the Denver zone manager, and the Denver zone manager, his name was Ken Fritz, and he was a fireball. But he said, yeah. So he gets me on the phone. He gets talking. He's all excited. We got a dealer that we need to replace him. We need to replace him. Okay, that's not really what I do, but I'm looking for an opportunity to either work or to help somebody. He said, oh, we need somebody to take this guy out. I said, well, I'm not a hitman. Anyway, he sets me up an appointment, and I go see Merrill Bean in Ogden. And he's courteous. He knows what they're trying to do. And I spent a week up there, and my contact was John Waite, who was the district manager, who would report to Ken. And I reported to him every night after I'd spent the day trying to get something going. I couldn't get anything going, and I told him I can't. He said, but then John said to me, he says, you know, I have another dealer here in town. He says, he's a brand new dealer, just bought out his dad. He's in big trouble. He needs somebody with some help, and he's under relocation orders. And he's never worked a day in his life other than in that little store. He said, was that something that'd be interesting to you? I said, hey, I'm interested. I want to come back to Utah. This is where I grew up. This is where I want to be, and this is where my wife and my family want to be. So he says, okay, well, let me see what I can do. And so I go back to Merrill Bean, and he does make an offer, but the offer's ridiculous. You know, he wants you to pay all this money for a store that's mediocre at best, plus buy his cabin in the mountains and his plane, and you work that out as the blue sky for him. So I told Ken this isn't going to happen. John gets back to me and says he'll meet with you. So I went and met with Chris, and when I met with Chris, we set it up, was when you and your mother and I came up here.
Right, that was October.
Mm-hmm.
I remember going to dinner with Chris and Donna Ann and you and Mom up at Snowbird or someplace like that, in October.
Yep.
But you came out, you basically were interviewing him and he was interviewing you, and you also had the mindset that you were coming to Utah.
Yeah.
You guys started house hunting right then.
Yeah, we did.
And I went through the temple and received my endowments. We did the Mr. Mac shopping, and you made an offer on a house. That's how confident you were that you were coming. But you didn't have the job with Chris right off the bat.
No. In fact, Chris, I like Chris.
You got 3 minutes left, so we'll have to pick this up on another
Chris
session.
is a good guy, and I like Chris, but he can't make a decision. He absolutely can't make a decision.
Not a quick decision. I mean,
No.
he's made plenty of decisions in his life. Let's be fair to him. He's a good man.
Oh, he is.
But he's very cautious.
He's afraid to make a bad decision, so the answer is don't make the decision. Let somebody else make it. And then if it goes sour, it's their problem. If it goes good, I'll help them and pat them on the back and join in the spoils. And that's what he did. He couldn't give me an answer on that trip. So I gave him an answer. I said, look, I just bought this house because I bought it. I just bought this house, and I'm going to be here on December 5th. Now, I'm going to show up at work, and I'm going to go to work. Now, you don't have to pay me, but if you like what you see and if you like what I do, pay me. If you don't, I'll eventually go away. I won't be angry and I won't be mad, but I'll go away. And he said, no, you can't do it. I said, yeah, I can. I just told you I would, and if I told you I would, I will. So we closed on the house. We went back to California. We moved up on the 5th. I showed up at work. I went in there, and the first week, I found lots and lots of real big problems. One that was so significant that if we didn't deal with it, he was toast. And that was he had over $500,000 in receivables that were over a year old.
From the warranty processing, right?
Yep.
So parts and service, labor sales and part sales
Everything.
hadn't been paid. And you had to get, and I think we'll 45 seconds on this session, we'll pick up that
Don
next
Campbell.
time. Don Campbell did you a solid by giving you a window of opportunity to get those things submitted and get those things paid.
Yep.
Did you have to do those before December 31st? Or
No, we did them very quickly. Brenda Steele, I, and
Annette Smith?
Annette Smith worked Brenda and I 48 hours straight, and some of the others, Bonnie Parkinson, she got a whole bunch in there too. Anyway, we packaged all that up and shipped it to Don's personal desk.
Well, that's where we're going to have to end because our
And
time's up.
he took it over to central accounting and